Talk about the origin of life and whether it could have come about by chance or not. And you won't be surprised to see that the Bible says no, that life didn't come about by chance, that God created life, and we'll see that's true. But the funny thing is that if you talk to a scientist and they tell you about life, and I'm going to show you some quotes later, the scientists actually, let me just say the scientific data, the scientific data also says that life couldn't have come about by chance. And that's what I'm going to show you a good deal of that today and why that's true. And I'm going to show you some scientists that fully believe that it came about by chance, but they don't have any clue how it happened. Okay, they don't have any clue. I mean, this is as an organic chemist, and we were talking a minute ago about he was trying to make some complicated chemicals in the lab, and I've tried to do that for years. And it's hard. It's hard to do, and we're trying to do it under controlled conditions. And what the secular folks are saying is, well, life just came about just randomly in the world. And I'm going to show you how hard that would be and how hard that is to defend. And so here's what I want to try to help you see, that life is a precious gift from God. And there's no getting around it. It's a precious gift of God. And that one that our society is moving away from. Sadly, but a precious gift from God. So how did life begin? Did it begin by a supernatural process that's pictured by this picture by Michelangelo? Or did it happen just by a chance? By a lot of people say from goo to you by the zoo or something, but they just say, does some random chemical process somehow started in some warm little pond somewhere, they'd say, and it turned into life. And I'm going to show you today how complicated you are. You are incredibly complicated. But let me go back to worldviews for just a minute. Here we have two scientists. The woman on the right and the man on the left. The woman on the right is a believer. She's a follower of Christ. And she looks at these bones with her biblical worldview, and she says, she's thinking, okay, those are the bones of an ape. And those of you that have been to the Creation Museum, you've seen the exhibit that David Minton puts up there with the holographic pictures and all that. And he shows you what those bones are. These are the bones of Lucy. Okay, you're familiar with Lucy, probably. You've heard of Lucy. And these are all the bones that we have, despite what they would want you to believe. And she looks at this, the creationist looks at this and says, okay, that's an extinct ape. And the bones are consistent with an extinct ape. And as I said, they show you how and you look at that and you'd say, well, how can you conclude anything unequivocally from those bones? Well, you can't really, okay? But it is consistent, certainly more consistent with an ape structure, though, than it is with a human or even a so-called ape man. But as you can see, a lot of the bones that you'd want to see there are just not there. The hands, the feet, all of the pelvis and the skull, a lot of that's missing. But the man on the left, he's a secular person, and he looks at those bones and he says, oh, that's a ape man, or an ape woman in this case with Lucy, okay? And so he says, well, that's some form of a transitional form between an ape and a human. And they're both looking at the same evidence, right? Both looking at the same evidence, coming to different conclusions because of their perspective. Okay, and so that's where And that's where we are. We're going to see a lot of that today. There really are two kinds of science. And the professors in the universities like to blur the distinction between the two. And I want to try to help you understand that today a little bit. Experimental science is the kind of science that I did every day at Eastman Chemical Company. I did experiments, I interpreted the results, I used the scientific method basically every day. And that's the kind of science that you do to try to discover the next, if you're working in a pharmaceutical company, to discover the next antibiotic. You make compounds, you test them, you put them in people, you test them there. You do a lot of good scientific work and you come up with this. I put a structure of a recent antibiotic up there. Or if you're trying to discover the Higgs boson, a tiny elementary particle physics kind of thing, you use the physicists have looked at these particles and they now determine that there is such a thing as a Higgs boson. Of course, we've never seen one. They may well be right. They probably are. But that's what you get when you're trying to do experimental science. All right. Now, there is historical science. Now, that's, in my mind, different. An example of historical science is, how did life begin? Okay? That's not something that we can do experiments on in the laboratory, right? We can do experiments in the laboratory that relate to the subject, but we can't create life in the laboratory. And so, or what kind of sounds did a T-Rex make? Okay? Now, okay, we've got Jurassic Park movies and, right? And we've, and I'll show you some of that in a little bit here, but we don't know what kind of sounds a T-Rex make. Now, can we look at the skull of a T-Rex and try to estimate what kind of sounds an animal like that could make? Well, sure, we can do that. We can try, but can we know what kind of sounds a T-Rex make? Well, no, we can't for sure. But what I'm trying to say is that your confidence in your results in historical science has to be less than your confidence in experimental science, right? And so that's all I want to try to help you understand, is that when we're looking at historical issues, we're doing our best to try to figure out what happened in the past, but you can't know for sure. The only one that knows is the one that wrote this book here, right? And so he knows, but we don't. And so that's kind of where we are in science now. And I want you to remember too another thing about science. Science is different from mathematics. Okay, in mathematics, what can you do? You can prove things in mathematics. Okay, 1 + 1 is going to be 2 every time, right? But in science, we like to think it's the same. We like to think that we can prove things in science, but we actually don't prove things in science. We do experiments to try to disprove theories. And so we try to disprove as many theories as we can, and what's left we believe is the truth, but we can't prove it because that's the way God left the universe. We can't prove a lot of these things are true. And so mathematics, 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. Experimental science is always going to be more certain than historical science, but even experimental science is not going to be 100% certain. Okay, it's like the law of gravity. Okay, gravity has gotten up to the status of a law, and so if I take these things and I drop it, it's going to drop, and if I do it, it's going to do it every time. But it's potentially true that maybe sometime in the future we drop something and it doesn't drop. I don't know, but so there's the potential that in the future that it would change, but we don't know. I'm just saying that the way science works, you can't technically prove anything. Okay. Another thing about this world, why are we even able to do science? I want you to think about that for just a minute. What is true about this world that makes it possible for us to do science. Okay? What does this world have to be? It has to have three characteristics. It needs to be, this world needs to be consistent, it needs to be orderly, and it needs to be logical. Okay? Because what if I did an experiment on Monday in the laboratory, and I went ahead and did the same experiment on Friday, and I got different results, what good would it do for me to do science? Because science would be changing every day. What good would it do if I were doing experiments trying to figure something out and it wasn't orderly? I wasn't able to figure out I wasn't capable of figuring out what was going on. So it wouldn't do me any good there either. What about logical? When I did experiments at Eastman, I had to use logic to figure out what happened and why it happened. If logic weren't true, then I wouldn't have been able to do science. So this world has to be a certain way for us to be able to do science. Okay? And so let's think about that for a minute in terms of worldview. Okay? We've got the man on the left, and he says God's word is true, and we know we serve a logical God, right? A consistent God, a universe that's orderly. And so within a Christian worldview, in a biblical worldview, it works. You ought to be able to do science with a biblical worldview because things are orderly, logical, and consistent. But now, okay, let's look over here at an evolutionary kind of worldview. Okay? What would that... So the man on the right, the secular man, is thinking, evolution, how does it work? It's random. It's accidental. So how does that fit with a world that's orderly, consistent, and logical? Well, there's a bit of a problem there. Okay? And so you'd think that with a biblical foundation, people would say, well, science makes sense, but otherwise it might not. And so I like this quote from this is a Harvard professor. He's a professor of astronomy, I think, at Harvard, or he was. I believe he still is. And he was interviewed by a magazine and asked about his religious beliefs. All right. And so what does any good Harvard professor do when asked like that? He runs as fast as he can away from that kind of question. He says, I was secular to start with. I am not religious. I am struck by the order that we find in the universe, by the regularity, by the existence of laws of nature. That is something that I'm always in awe of, how the laws of nature we find here on earth seem to apply all the way out to the edge of the universe. That is quite remarkable. Okay? And so he's fascinated by this. He's fascinated by this, and he goes on, he says, the universe could have been very chaotic and very disorganized, but it obeys a set of laws much better than the people obey a set of laws here. Okay? And he says, my work as a scientist is purely based on evidence and rational thinking. That's all. Okay? Now, is he confused or what? Okay? He knows that he expected the universe to be disorganized. He knows that his worldview would say that the universe, in his case, he's an astronomy professor, so he's thinking about the universe. And he knows the universe, it ought to be random. It ought to be accidental. But what does he say? He said it obeys the laws all the way out to the edge of the universe as best he can tell. And so he's conflicted. Okay, I just wanted y'all to see that how conflicted you almost have to be, but you can see it internally in this quote. And so let's look at the different worldviews, and we'll look at first at the biblical worldview. Okay. All right. Okay. And so, what does the Bible tell us about life and about man? It says, "Let us make man in our likeness and in our image and after our likeness." And so God made us, made man in his image. Did he make anything else in his image? No, only us. He made us in his image. And what else? So he gave us, we have value because of God, because he made us in his image. We have purpose. What does it say in Ephesians 2:10? We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. All right? So he's given it, we have value to God. We have, because he made us, we have purpose. We have a morality in that sense. Hang on a minute. Okay. And we have, what does it say in Jeremiah 31:33? I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. I did this one time like this when I was giving one of these talks, and that man says, that's not really written on your heart, and I just shook my head. I've spoken a few times at the Ark in the museum, and you get some very strange questions sometimes from the folks there. I've been amazed at how many people are not followers of Christ that go to those exhibits, and I'm encouraged by that. But yeah, I do get some strange stuff. But no, it's not physically written on our hearts. But what? But it is kind of written on our hearts in a sense because God has put his law in us, and we know that. We know what's right and wrong. We don't always do right, but we know right and wrong. Okay? And then Psalm 39:13, one of my favorite verses here. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. And of course, we're going to talk later about how our society is valuing life less these days, sadly. But that's where we are. I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't avoid putting pictures of my grandchildren up here. Okay. I'm sure nobody's ever done that before, but this is my daughter and her husband, Joe, and Graham and Hadley. They're older now, but I put this picture up for a reason, because I want to show you that the life that God put in me and my wife, we put in my daughter, Kristen, and she and her husband put their life into Graham and Hadley. And so life comes from life. And that's what the Bible says. For just as the Father has life in himself, so he gave to the Son also to have life in himself. John 5:26. And then finally, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty has given me life. And so another point I want us to make sure that we remember is that we're not just a bag of chemicals, right? I mean, we have an incredibly sophisticated, complicated body, but we also have an immaterial part, a spiritual part in us that we shouldn't forget about. But life there is precious. And let's see. Oh, there we go. And more grandchildren pictures. This is my youngest son and his wife Yashin and their daughter Lily. I don't think I got. There's another one now, Evan, but I didn't have his picture in there. But it turns out that again, that science says that life comes from life. They call it biogenesis. Louis Pasteur did experiments years ago, back in the 1850s, and he discovered that when you put a piece of meat out, if you leave it uncovered, that flies come out of it. But it's not because that flies came out of it, were born out of the meat. It's because that flies laid eggs and more flies came out of it. And so he discovered that people were confused back then. They didn't know where life came from. And so he did those experiments and showed that if you did it under sterile conditions, that living things didn't come out of dead things. And so, but people before believed that it did. And so even science says that life comes from life. But what does evolution require? What does evolution require? Evolution requires abiogenesis, which means that dead things have to come to life. Okay, and so that's a major difference there we have. Okay, and so now let's switch over to the secular worldview. What does the secular worldview says? That we are, we're formed by chance. It says that, let's see, let me catch up. Okay. That we decide if we have a purpose, and we decide what it is. That's what a secular view is. That a secular person, I get to decide everything. If I'm a secular person, I get to decide everything. There's no external standard for right and wrong. I decide what's right and wrong, or the people, or the biggest and the strongest decides what's right and wrong. Okay, and so in a secular worldview, you decide what's right and wrong, and then death is the end. Okay, for a secular person, death is the end. There's no life after death in a secular worldview. Okay, I want to go through some pretty tough statistics here, just to show how life has become not very valuable to people in our society. The suicide rate has increased almost 30% in the last 18 years. To me, that is incredibly sad. But within what I could believe is true. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Abortions are allowed in the state of New York now up to the point of birth, if you can believe that. It is just so incredibly sad to me to see that kind of thing. And laws, and something that you may not be familiar with and sneaking in on us now, is that 9 states actually allow euthanasia now here in the United States. 9 states actually allow euthanasia. And the reasons are varying, but once you get it in, soon it'll be for whatever reason that you want. And so to me, it's just I just wanted to, I mean, I know you know this, but I just wanted you to see the extent of how difficult or how invaluable life is becoming here, even in the United States. This one's kind of funny. The secular folks were trying to decide what the definition of life is. Okay? Now I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about your own definition of life. How would you describe life? I want you to come up with kind of a scientific definition of life. Okay? It's not as easy as you might think. Okay? And so here's what somebody was asking me about NASA. Here's what one of our NASA friends came up with. Okay? Now, you know the goal of NASA, right, is to try to find life on other planets. And why is that the goal? Is so that they can show that no matter that evolution is true, that wherever you've got the right conditions, you're going to have life, is their contention. Okay, and so here it is. Life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Okay? Can you believe that? That's what, I mean, so that assumes an awful lot there, that Darwinian evolution is true, and but how does that make you feel? You are a self-sustaining chemical process capable of Darwinian evolution. Do you feel good about that? Not too good, huh? Well, that's where NASA believes that you are. Okay. Let's see. So because of that, they've decided, since they couldn't come up with a very good definition, even they decided that this definition wasn't very good. All right. And so what did they decide to do? They decided to list the things that living things can do. And let's look at that list again. It's a pretty incredible list. Okay. you convert food into energy. Okay? Now, that's not that easy. There's a lot of different kinds of food. But, I mean, we eat proteins, we eat fats, we eat sugars, we eat starches, we eat all kinds of things. And our bodies, for the most part, are able to digest most of those things. And it's, like I said, it's a pretty complex process. And I took a biology course just for fun. I took at the local university just to see what they were saying about this kind of thing. And one of the first things they talked about was what they call homeostasis. Okay, and that's how your body controls its internal conditions. All right, and so what does your body control? Your body controls its temperature. Your body controls its heart rate. Your body controls the pH of your blood, the acidity of your blood. Your body controls an enormous number of things, and we'll talk about some of those things that your body controls. But would a random accidental process come up with a system that controls everything? I mean, just think about it for a minute. Your body basically controls everything about you. And the systems that your body uses to control things is just incredibly complex. You respond to stimuli. You grow and develop. Just think about this for a minute. You grow. I'm sure you never thought about this, but as your bones grow, your muscles have to grow to match it. Okay? I mean, your skin has to grow to match it. Everything, as you grow and develop, it's actually pretty complicated for somebody to grow. But we do it without any difficulty. We start in the womb, and our body just grows, and it somehow magically all the things match up, and we turn out as a regular human being. Okay, but the most fascinating thing that living things do is reproduce. Okay, think about that for a minute. What else in this world reproduces? Think about that for a minute. What else in this world reproduces? Can you even make something that can make more of itself? Think about that for a minute. Do we know how to make anything that can reproduce? If you've got an example, let me know later. I couldn't think of anything. And not only does living things do each of these things individually, it does them all together, and it works together perfectly. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that living things can do. Now, what about dead chemicals, lifeless chemicals? They do these kind of things? No, life is special. Life is very different. The secular theory is that life began about 3.8 billion years ago. They believe the earth is 4.54 billion years old to 2 or 3 decimal places, believe it or not. They think that life started, that bacterial kind of life started about 3.8 billion years ago. And that, but they've got a problem. They want to say that life began on the early earth, and that it began with a chemical that could reproduce itself. That it's simple enough to be formed not in a laboratory, on the early earth, just by itself, but then it's complicated enough to reproduce itself. Now, y'all are not chemists, but I think you already know that there is no molecule like that. There is no molecule that's simple enough it can be made on the early earth and complicated enough to reproduce itself. Only living things can reproduce themselves, not simple chemicals. And so there is no such thing that fits this definition. Okay, as I said. And so, okay. This is one of the most fascinating quotes that I was able to find. George Whiteside's famous Harvard organic chemist. He's done a lot of research on the origin of life. He's done a whole bunch of research on the origin of life. And here's what George Whiteside said. He said, let me get that up here. Let me get it right. Most chemists believe as I do, I don't, by the way, but most chemists believe as I do, he says, that life emerged spontaneously from mixtures of molecules in the prebiotic earth. Okay, so he believes that. Okay, but he has incredible faith based on this next statement. He says, how? I have no idea. On the basis of all the chemistry that I know, and he knows a lot more than me, it seems astonishingly improbable that life could have begun. Okay, so in one of his more sane, serious moments, he goes, I'm sure it happened by accident, but I haven't got a clue how it happened. And I know as much as anybody in this world about organic chemistry and about the origin of life. Okay, he does. He's a brilliant man. But you saw what he said. So that's why I say that even science says that life didn't begin by accident. Okay, so where did life begin? It's kind of interesting. Some people say it started at those black smokers on the bottom of the ocean. You've heard of those, the hot spring, where the lava comes up underneath the ocean floor, and the hot water comes up, and there's all kinds of stuff coming out of there. They say, well, maybe life began there. Some people say, well, maybe life began in the Antarctic in the ice. Okay, they believe maybe it began in the ocean because it's hot and it's wet, and that you need heat. But then they say, well, the heat will destroy things, so maybe it needs to be cold. And so they can't make up their minds. But then this is my favorite one. They say, no, it began by panspermia. Okay, now most of you may not know what panspermia is. What they mean is that life began on some other planet and somehow came here on an asteroid, and then it got transferred here. Okay, so now that's really grasping at straws because of what? Well, somehow that life had to begin somewhere else by some mechanism, and they don't have any clue what that is. But then they say, well, okay, it must have happened somewhere else, and it must have been transferred here. But I want you to think for just a minute, how in the world could something live transfer through dark, cold outer space and then re-enter into our atmosphere, get burned, get up to a high temperature? How could anything survive any of that? But they don't let any of that bother them. They think that's the best explanation for now, which leads you to understand how desperate they are for a real explanation. But I say this, is panspermia a desperate attempt to save evolution? And I think probably so. They put a paper out on panspermia, and they had 33 authors on it. Okay, now I know you're not familiar with scientific publications, but normally 2, 4, 5 maybe, but not 33. And so everybody in the world wanted his or her name on this paper as being, I think, to try to save evolution as a theory. But yeah, they did that, and then they claim that the Earth is being constantly bombarded with life, such as space-hardy bacteria and viruses, more complex eukaryotic cells, sophisticated cells like you have, and then fertilized ova and seeds. And so, and so that life basically is coming here all the time, and we just kind of see it. And one of their favorite things is an octopus for some reason, and they think that octopi came here that way because the evolution has a hard time explaining that too. So, but anyway, that's the state of the theory. And so let's think about the chemistry of it now. Could lifeless molecules come to life? And so could simple chemicals like this have occurred on an early Earth, just, out in the environment? Well, yeah, probably. You probably could make some ammonia or water or carbon dioxide or whatever. If the chemicals were here to begin with, the basic chemical building blocks were here, you could potentially do that. But these are the kind of molecules you need for life. Okay, the one at the top is, I think that's hemoglobin. It's a protein. Okay, it's a protein. Your body is about half the weight is proteins. Okay, your skin, your hair, your muscles, all those things are mostly protein. but it has to be a specific complicated molecule. It can't be just any complicated big molecule that works. And so that's what people forget is, could complicated molecules work and may be made on early Earth? Well, yeah, they call it, when I used to make it in the laboratory, we used to call it tar, because it was just worthless. I mean, it was a mixture of everything and worthless. But what you need for life is specific, highly complex molecules like DNA and like proteins. And that's what's not going to happen. And then even if you had those, I mean, could you make a cell out of it? You can't. It turns out you can even take a cell and just kind of put it in a blender and deconstruct it, and you can leave it there for as long as you want. It won't make a living thing. It won't come back to life, okay, on its own. It just won't. And so even if you have the parts that you need to make a cell, it won't come back to life. And so that's what you're faced with if you're a secular person trying to explain how in the world life got here. And you got a real problem to do that with. Okay. And here's I read in my biology textbook, which I was fascinated to read, they finally understand part of the problem. And they say the question of the origin of life immediately poses a conundrum, a difficult problem, if you will, the way they put it in this book that I had. And what do they say? They go on for 6 or 8 pages about how it's a problem. And I summarized those 6 or 8 pages for you in one phrase here. Okay, it takes DNA to make a protein, and it takes protein to make a DNA. So where are you going to start? Okay, you can't have one or the other. You've got to have both. They know the chances of making either proteins or DNA is incredibly small, but they know even more that making DNA and proteins is even smaller. And so but it's just like a chicken and the egg problem. To make your DNA, and I'm going to show you that process here in a minute, is incredibly complex. It takes not just one protein, it takes many proteins working together to make DNA. And it takes your DNA to tell your body how to make each one of the proteins in your body. And so you can't just start with one. And so your body is mostly made of proteins. They're long chains of amino acids. Okay, these are small molecules that you eat parts of every day in the proteins that you do. But there are 20 different amino acids. And to make a protein in your body has to make the right sequence of amino acids to make, let's say you're trying to make a hair, okay? To make a hair, you need to make the right sequence of amino acids to do that, to have the right properties to function the way you need for it to. And it needs to have the right sequence, and that molecule, that long chain of molecules, needs to be folded up in the right way. Not only the right sequence, but folded up in the right way to make whatever you're trying to make. And so I put up hemoglobin as an example here. Hemoglobin is what? That's critical to your body's function. It's where, when you breathe air, oxygen into your lungs, it goes into your bloodstream, it finds the hemoglobin, which is in your red blood cells, and the hemoglobin takes the oxygen to every cell in your body. Okay, and so it's absolutely critical to life. And so what are the chances of making hemoglobin by accident? That's what I want to look at for just a minute. What are the chances of making hemoglobin by accident? So the chance of getting the first protein right is 1 in 20. Okay, because you got to get the right one to start with. So it's 1 in 20 for that one, 1 in 20 for the next one, 1 in 20 for the next one, and so okay, to get the first 20 amino acids right, the chances are 1 in this number up here. Okay, 1 in that number's got a lot of zeros. I don't even know exactly how you say that number, but it's a big number. Okay, and I tried to put it in my calculator to do the whole thing, but it just said it was an error, that there's not a number that big. Okay, and so what did I do? Yeah, the number is 20 to the 575th power. Okay, so there's 575 amino acids in hemoglobin, all right? And so there's a 1 in 20 chance of getting each one right. And so I had to estimate it, okay? And so that's the chance. That's the chance of making hemoglobin. Now, you don't need to, I'm sure you're sitting there counting. It's 780 zeros. Okay, 780 zeros after that one is what I estimated. I had to estimate it because there's no way to calculate that number. It's too big a number, okay? And so that just gives you an idea. And that's for one protein. Your body has thousands, tens of thousands of proteins in there. And that's for one to try to get it right. And so I put at the bottom, there's no chance of doing that, of getting even one right by chance. And so, okay, now I've got to the point. Now the young man in the back has gotten my models. Why don't you come up here just for a minute, if you don't mind, and show everybody the models. The amino acids actually come in two forms, okay? What's your name? Justin, okay. And so he's going to show, I've got models up here, and it turns out that those two forms, now see if you can make those, are those two the same? What do you think? Are they not? What do you think? They're not the same, are they? Why do you say that? You can't make them fit, can you? No, you try it every way. You can turn them every way you want to, and they don't exactly fit. Now, they have the same atoms. Okay, they have the same atoms. They've got a yellow one in the center, and that's the carbon. And they've got four things connected to them, but they're connected different. Okay, they're differently connected. It's like having a right hand and a left hand. Are your right hand and left hand the same? They're not the same, are they? Because you can't put them in the same, because your thumbs are left out, right? It's the same with that one. Now, if you take two of those atoms and swap them. Okay, here, put one down. Take the yellow, take the blue one, or any one of them you can take out. Some of them are easier than others. There you go. There you go. Now swap. There you go. Put that one back. Now, when you've swapped them, now see if you can put them together. Okay. There you go. You've almost got it. There. Let's keep turning just a little bit. Here you go. There you go. It's not quite. But if you turn them just right, they will, I think, work. Here, let me show you. Here, hang on a second. Let me show you. Okay. All right. So if we take it here and put it like that, okay? And you see, they are the same now, but I swapped two, okay? And so, here you go, I'll let you hold those. And so they're almost the same. They have the same chemical properties. They have only one minor chemical property that's different, is how they rotate light. Oops, well, we broke a molecule, that's all right. So, that's good. You did good, thanks, I appreciate your help. And so amino acids are interesting in that they can come in two different forms. Now, if I go in the laboratory and make those amino acids, what do I make? Well, I make half of one of those forms, half of the right-handed form, and half the left-handed form, okay? Every time. I go in the laboratory, every time I'm going to make exactly half one form and exactly half the other form. But now, in your bodies, it's a little bit different. Guess what? Every amino acid in your body is left-handed. Okay, every amino acid in your body is left-handed. Why is that the case? Because if you're making these complicated molecules that I showed you up there, they have to be one or the other to make the right shape. Okay, but I think God did it just to confuse us, just to confuse folks that wanted to believe He didn't exist. Okay, because it's not natural. Okay, the natural form, that naturally it occurs, whoops, let's see there. Yeah, naturally you're going to make half of one and half of the other. Everybody agrees to that. Everybody agrees that you're going to make half one, half the other. It's just statistics. Okay, but supernaturally, God just made one. Okay, God just made one. And your DNA is somewhat the same. Your DNA has three different parts, and one of the parts is a sugar. And that sugar can be right-handed or left-handed. And it turns out in your DNA, every one of those sugars is right-handed. Okay, every one. And so you are specifically made by God to function and to live. And so this should be a powerful clue to scientists that that is true. And they're working really hard to try to figure out why there's only one. They haven't come up with they've got a lot of answers, but none of them are very good. Okay, and so they continue to work to see that, but I don't believe they've made much progress yet. And so you've probably heard of the Stanley Miller experiments, Miller-Urey experiments. That's when he put a bunch of just simple chemicals in there, put an electrical charge in there, and he said he made amino acids. And they said, well, okay, that's the first step of making life. Okay. The trouble is he made both right and left-handed amino acids. He made mostly tar. He made a few amino acids, but he did kind of what you tried to do in the laboratory when you tried to make 3 amino acids linked together, and he saw how difficult it was. But it is a challenge to make any of these complex molecules. But what Miller did was make just the very simple molecules and nothing nearly as complex as we see here. I like this one. I want you to think about it this way. You've probably seen the Frankenstein movies, right? And this one's from Young Frankenstein. And so what do they do to Frankenstein? They put a lightning bolt into him and he comes to life, right? Well, it doesn't just take, that's not really true, by the way. Sorry to break your bubble. But it's not just energy you need for life. You need a way to channel that energy into a way that gives life, okay? And so that's what Frankenstein didn't have, okay, is a way to do that. And so it's not just energy that gives you life. Let's see, okay. Okay, this is just a summary of things that I've said. All right, I think I'll go on. Let's see. Oh, yeah. All righty. This is a simplified DNA. You know what DNA is? DNA is basically the molecule that has all the information in you that makes you who you are physically. Okay, it makes you who you are physically. There are 3 billion pairs of letters in the DNA, and that's the information that makes you you. You're different. Everyone in this room has a different DNA sequence. It's not much different because we're all people, but it is different. And so we're all, as we can see by looking at each other, we're all different. It's just a series of 4 different complicated molecules put together is what the DNA is. Okay. There we go. DNA is like a code. I'll go through this quickly. DNA is like a language, if you will. It's a code. It's full of information. And people that want to believe in evolution would say, well, this information just came, just came about by accident. But how would that, do books write themselves? Basically that's what we're talking about. Does a book come from an explosion in ink in a paper factory? Why, no. You need information. And so information comes from intelligence, comes from people. But DNA is full of information. This is what Werner Getz says. He's a German creationist. And he says this: there is no known law of nature, no process, no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate in itself, okay, in matter. So Werner Getz defends the proposition that information doesn't come about by accident, okay? And here, okay.
The job of this mRNA.
If you would mute it, thank you. This is how proteins are made in your body, okay? This is the information, that's the nucleus, the big purple thing. The information came out on an RNA, actually, from the DNA. This is a ribosome, the blue enzyme up there, and you can see the information. Well, that's the protein coming out of the top as it's being made in your body. and we'll go back to the other, it'll come back. There we go. So there's the RNA strand where the information is. There's the ribosome clamping on and feeding the information. It's like a ticker tape. It's like feeding an alphabet of information, a code right through there. And what happens is all the different amino acids have that the amino acid is the red dot. The big green molecule is what's attached to it. And they line up, the big green molecule lines up with the ticker tape going through and carries the right amino acid in there and makes that protein in exactly the right sequence at a very rapid rate. You can see how fast it's going. That's about the speed that it goes. It goes in and out, and it reads, and it finds the right amino acid, puts it in the sequence, and it comes out the top, the red part out the top. You can see there now that they've taken it away, kind of what it does. So that is going on inside your body all day, every day, making proteins, okay? Unbelievable. I mean, as a scientist, I just stand amazed. This film was done by Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a bunch of evolutionists, okay? How in the world they could be an evolutionist after what they put together here, I have no idea. But they are. But I assume most of them are. But they look at this and say, that's how a ribosome, that's how all the proteins in your body are made. And that's how you make a protein with the right sequence rather than by accident. You take the information from the DNA. The DNA has all the information for all your proteins, and in addition to that, it tells your cells when to make the proteins and all that in addition, which we completely don't understand yet. But we do understand that 1.5% of your DNA has the information that tells your body how to make all the proteins that you need to make. Now the other 98.5%, we're still trying to figure out. They thought it was junk. They used to call it junk DNA, and now they know it's not junk. But they're still not sure exactly how it works. But I can tell you that the control systems in your body have a lot to do with what the rest of the DNA is. There are 200 different kind of cells in your body. Your DNA tells your body how to make every one of those kind of cells. It's just, DNA is just, I mean, it controls what proteins you make from the moment of fertilization till the moment of your passing, throughout your entire life. We're just beginning to understand the tiniest amount about how DNA works. It is just incredible. But something I want to tell you just about reproduction just for a minute. As I've said earlier, we don't know how to make anything that makes more of itself. Okay, so this is not how new cars are made, right? They don't come out of the trunk of old cars, right? But that's not how we make a new car. But this is how, in order for your body to make a new cell, you have to copy the DNA in your body, right? Because you need a DNA molecule in every one of your cells, right? And so in order to do that, you have to copy your DNA. Well, this is how your body copies its DNA, okay? So the first thing it does is unwinds it. You can see it coming in here from the left. It hits that little blue molecule. That blue molecule unwinds your DNA at 10,000 RPM, revolutions per, faster than your car motor runs, okay? It unwinds your DNA. And then it splits it into two sequences. The one on the right gets copied in the forward direction, which is easier. It's very difficult. The chemistry here is so complicated. It would take me hours and hours to try to explain to you. And so the one strand is copied in the forward direction. The other strand has to be copied in the reverse direction, because what I didn't tell you is this helix, when the DNA is wound together, they're actually wound in opposite directions. And so you actually have to copy the other strand in the opposite direction and then loop it back. You saw those big loops, and you loop it back in. I mean, to believe that that's how you're looping it back in. And you can see, and they've taken half the enzymes away so you can see what's going on. It's just so complicated. Again, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute people did this. But this is the critical part of reproduction, is you have to copy the DNA for your body to be able to make a new cell. If you can't make a new cell, you don't last very long because your cells die, okay? And certainly you can't make new people without new DNA, okay? And so, to me, I thought I'd show you these two just to give you an idea of how complicated you are, and how unlikely it is for this to have happened by accident. Okay, so there it goes. Yeah, let me do it. Okay, this is the verse that comes to my mind when I see this video. It says, Jesus looked at them and said, "With man it's impossible; with God all things are possible." And so I saw that real quick. Let's see. When am I supposed to be done on this one? Another few minutes. Let's see. I think. Was this supposed to go to 12, Pastor? Oh, wait a minute. I've got it. I'm here. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, we need a break too. Let me do just a few more things real quick, and then I'll wrap it up. The pastor wanted me to say just a little bit about evolution too. So I've talked about how dead chemicals don't come to life. Okay. So let me just talk a little bit about why simple life doesn't become more complicated by accident. And we'll look at that real quick. And I showed you that already. But basically, you need more information. Well, here again is evolution. Evolution says you start with the simplest thing and you somehow evolve all the way up. God's Word says that you start with all the different kinds and they become they become more diverse as time goes on. And basically, this is a quote from an evolutionist, and he basically says, just in summary, that evolution doesn't make new things. It just kind of rearranges what it has. Okay. Well, okay. I challenge you to say how you're going to take the parts of a bacteria and make a human being. Okay. So how do you rearrange the parts of a bacteria and make a human being? It doesn't make any sense. How do you rearrange the parts of a bacteria and even make a worm? Okay, right? I mean, this is the parts of a worm. I mean, it's fairly complicated. These things are all over the world in the dirt. But how do you even do that? And this is one of the craziest quotes I've seen from a Harvard professor. Time, in fact, is the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. Okay? Now, one only has to wait. Time itself performs a miracle. Okay, what is time performs? What is time? What can time do? Nothing. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. The scientific principles don't change over time. It's no more likely the more time you have to make something that doesn't make sense scientifically. And I just want to help you understand that DNA, I like to call it the instruction book. Okay, it's like you had an instruction book of how to make a car or how to make a lawnmower or whatever. It has the information in it that tells you how to build something. It tells your body how to build itself. Okay, and what evolution says is that you take the instruction book for something simple, like a car. Okay, not real simple, but let's pick up something. Let's take an instruction book for a car. And what you do is you randomly change the letters in the instruction book, and magically that instruction book becomes an instruction book for an airplane. Okay, now, does that make any sense to anybody or not? Okay, what happens when you randomly change the letters in a book? Does it make more sense or less sense? Well, it makes less sense, right? And so but that's what evolution does. It randomly changes things and somehow, they say, generates more information, which it doesn't do and it can't really do. And so there's a professor out there that has taken E. coli, which are a type of bacteria, kind of a bad kind that you don't want. And he has, believe it or not, run this experiment for decades now. And he's gone through now 75,000 generations of E. coli, trying to show evolution in action. Okay? And at the end, he did like 12 different experiments all together. And that's all. Well, I tell you what, if you wanted to have a bad graduate student project, okay, this would be it. All right, because you're doing the same thing every day for years. All right, and that's what you just grow this culture for years, and that's what they've done. And they found in one of the 12 cultures, they found something that changed, and they claimed that that was evolution. The trouble is that what changed was there was something that this bacteria wouldn't do, but they put it in an environment that made it want to do it, and so it did it. And it was already able to do it, and it had just lost the ability. So during this process, it regained the ability to do something that it had forgotten how to do. It's not something new. It's just something that it used to know how to do that it had stopped doing. And so there is nothing in here that says that this gained a function of any kind, okay? And what did they have after 75,000 generations, which is the equivalent of many human generations, probably the equivalent of about 1 million years of human evolution, if you will, or whatever. What do they have after? They started with E. coli. What did they end up with? E. coli. After 75,000 generations, and only one of those strains had anything change, and it changed. It changed to something that it used to be able to do, but had lost the ability to do. And so it's nothing new. There was nothing new there. But they claim, of course, it was evolved, and that's what it was. But anyway, you've heard about the Galapagos finches. What are they today? They're still Galapagos finches. Okay, they change as the climate changes. The size of their beaks changes, and it goes like this. And they get bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. They're still Galapagos finches. They still look like this. They're not even different. They're not even different kind of birds. They're just finches. Okay, and so they haven't changed. It's a good example of adaptation, which creationists believe in. That's fine. But and so let me skip through that. Yeah, the only thing I was going to show you there is that in your DNA, your 3 billion letters, there are a bunch of diseases that if one of your letters of the 3 billion changes, you can have a serious disease. And there are 50, 100, 200 of those diseases known now. And that's to give you an idea of how specific your DNA needs to be. Now, some changes in your DNA makes no effect, or no effect that we can measure, but some critical places in your DNA, if they get changed, you get something like cystic fibrosis or polycystic kidney disease, or there are many of these diseases that people get just by one mistake, one mutation in their DNA. And so mutations are bad, and we'll talk more about that later. But let me end it there because I think I'm over time. But I just want to reiterate to you how very precious life is and how very special you are. And because God has made us, and that He's made us in His image, and His wisdom, He did that. And so, but I just want us to understand how precious and how unlikely it is for life to have begun by chance. All right, thanks. Appreciate that.